Christmas night. The city was finally asleep, blanketed in a thick layer of silent, white snow. I was alone in my apartment, watching the flakes drift down past my window, feeling that familiar holiday loneliness settle in. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I glanced at the clock on my phone. 12:11 a.m. Christmas was officially over. I sighed, ready to head to bed. But then, at exactly 12:12 a.m., a new sound cut through the silence. It wasn't a knock, not at first. It was the faint, rhythmic jingle of bells. My heart skipped a beat. It sounded like Santa's sleigh, but the sound wasn't coming from outside on the roof. It was coming from right outside my apartment door, in the hallway. My building's hallway. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing up. Who would be ringing bells in the hallway at this hour? The jingling stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence again. Then, a slow, heavy knock echoed through my small apartment. 3 times. Boom. Boom. My breath caught in my throat. I crept to the door, my bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. I peered through the peephole. The hallway was dimly lit, but what I saw made my blood run cold. A tall, hulking shadow stood there, cloaked in a dark red coat. It looked like a Santa suit, but it was all wrong. The color was too deep, like dried blood, and the fabric seemed old and tattered. I couldn't see a face, just the dark outline of a head beneath a floppy red hat. The figure was unnervingly still, just standing there, waiting. I wanted to back away, to pretend I wasn't home. But then a voice whispered through the door. It was a low, raspy sound that scraped against my ears. "I brought what you forgot." Slowly, a gloved hand extended from the shadows and placed a small, neatly wrapped gift box on the floor in front of my door. The box was tied with a simple, red ribbon. On the small gift tag, my name was written in a familiar, looping script. It was my own handwriting. My mind raced. How? I hadn't written any gift tags this year. I hadn't forgotten anything. Against my better judgment, a strange compulsion took over. I unlocked the door, my hand trembling, and opened it just a crack. The hallway was empty. The figure was gone. Only the small gift box remained on the welcome mat. I quickly snatched it inside and slammed the door shut, locking it twice. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I sat on the floor, the box in my lap. It felt strangely heavy. With shaking fingers, I tore off the wrapping paper and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was a single, old, rusted jingle bell. It looked ancient, covered in grime and decay. Tucked beside it was a tiny, folded note. Primera, opened, Italiano. The same familiar handwriting stared back at me. It read, "Ring it, and I'll come back." A shiver traced its way down my spine. A past connection? A mistake I couldn't remember. I stared at the bell, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. I would never ring this thing. I stood up to throw it away, to get it as far from me as possible. But as I took a step, the hallway lights outside my door flickered and went out, plunging everything into darkness. And in the sudden, oppressive silence, a sound made me scream. The bell, still sitting in the box on my floor, rang just once. A dull, deadened clink that echoed in the dark. Before I could even process what had happened, my apartment door, the one I had slammed shut with a violent, deafening crash. The force of it shook the walls. I stumbled backward, my eyes wide with terror, staring at the door. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was no longer alone in my apartment. The air grew cold, and the faint, sweet smell of pine needles. And something else, something like damp earth, filled the room. Then, the whisper came again. This time from right behind me, so close I could feel the cold breath on my neck. "You invited me last Christmas, too." I spun around, finding nothing but empty air. "That's impossible," I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. I live alone. I've always lived alone." The whisper chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that seemed to come from all around me. And in that moment, I realized this nightmare wasn't new. It was a tradition I didn't remember starting. What happened last Christmas? Who was this thing? And what did it want from me? They say Santa comes down the chimney, but this thing came out of my memories. Last time, you saw me pick up that rusted bell. Now, let me tell you what happened next. The cold from the metal seeped into my skin, and suddenly, I wasn't in my living room anymore. I was back on that dark, snowy road from last Christmas. The screech of tires, the sickening thud. A man in a red coat sprawled on the asphalt. My car kept going. I didn't stop. I just ran, and under my tire, I saw a small silver bell crushed into the slush. My heart pounded in my chest, the guilt I'd buried for a year clawing its way up my throat. Snapping back to the present, I looked down at the bell in my hand. A thick, dark liquid, almost like tar, began to ooze from its rusted surface, dripping onto the floor. Where each drop landed, the hardwood warped and blackened as if the frost that had been creeping across my windows started to form strange, spidery patterns, and the faint dusting of snow I'd seen earlier was now a thick, grimy slush, piling up against the walls. The air grew heavy, smelling of pine rot and something metallic, like old blood. The gentle jingle from before was gone, replaced by a low, guttural hum that vibrated through my bones. I wanted to drop the bell, to throw it as far away as I could, but my fingers wouldn't obey. It was like the cold that fused it to my hand. The cheerful Christmas decorations around the room suddenly looked like leering, mocking faces. The twinkling lights on the tree began to flicker violently, casting long, dancing shadows that twisted into grotesque shapes. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run, but I was frozen, a prisoner in my own home, watching as my festive sanctuary transformed into a stage for some unspeakable horror. The bell was no longer just an object. It was an anchor, pulling me down into a nightmare I had created. Then, a sound from across the room made my blood run cold. A loud crack like stones splitting under immense pressure. My eyes darted to the fireplace. The brickwork was groaning, shifting. A hairline fracture appeared, then another, spreading like a spiderweb across the mantel. Dust and soot rained down onto the hearth. This wasn't a natural collapse. The bricks were being pushed apart from the inside. With a final, deafening, splintering sound, the entire fireplace burst open, revealing a gaping, black maw where the chimney should have been. The darkness within was absolute, a void that seemed to drink the light from the room. A long, skeletal hand, gray and covered in soot, reached out from the abyss and gripped the edge of the broken mantel. Then another. Slowly, agonizingly, a figure began to pull itself out. It was tall, impossibly so, its limbs bending at angles that weren't human. It unfolded itself, its back scraping against the top of the ruined fireplace, standing nearly 10 feet tall. It wore the tattered remains of a familiar red coat, now stained black with soot and something wetter. But the face, that was the worst part. It was a twisted, elongated mockery of a human face. And one half of it, horribly, was mine. It had my eyes, my nose, my mouth, stretched and distorted into a permanent, silent scream. It was a doppelganger from the deepest pit of hell, wearing my own guilt as a mask. The creature took a stiff, jerky step forward, its joints cracking with each movement. It dragged a large, burlap sack behind it, the rough material scraping loudly against the floor. The bag was lumpy, misshapen, and I could see dark stains seeping through the fabric. As it drew closer, I saw names crudely stitched onto the sack in what looked like red thread. I recognized them, the Millers from down the street, the old couple from number 42, my neighbors, all the people on my block who had inexplicably gone missing over the past week. A wave of nausea washed over me as the horrifying truth crashed down. They weren't missing. They were collected. They were gifts. The creature stopped just a few feet away, its single, mismatched Ethowa, one that wasn't mine, fixed on me with an ancient, predatory intelligence. It slowly lifted a bony finger and pointed at an empty spot on the sack, right at the very bottom. It was waiting for one last name. My name. I wasn't just a witness to this horror. I was the final destination. I was the last present to be collected on its list. The fear that had been simmering in my gut erupted into pure, unadulterated terror. This wasn't just about a past sin anymore. This was about my life, my very existence, being erased and stuffed into that horrifying bag. The half-me, half-monster, tilted its head, the movement accompanied by the sound of grinding bone. It was silent, so quiet I could hear the frantic, useless drumming of my own heart. Then, a voice slithered into my mind. It wasn't spoken aloud, but whispered directly into my consciousness. A dry, rasping sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Ring it," the voice hissed, "and take my place." My eyes flew to the rusted bell, still fused to my hand. Take its place. Become that, a purveyor of this Christmas nightmare, cursed to collect the souls of the guilty. It was an ultimatum, a choice between two impossibly terrible fates. Be dragged away in that sack, my name stitched alongside my neighbor's, or become the monster that haunts the holidays. The distorted half of its face that mirrored mine seemed to peel back in a grotesque smile. It knew it had me. There was no escape, no third option. The curse wasn't about punishment, it was about propagation. It needed a successor. It needed me. The psychological weight of it was crushing, a terror far worse than any physical threat. I was trapped, not by walls or locked doors, but by my own past and the horrific choice it now presented. My mind relit, trying to find a way out, but there was only the bell, the sack, and the creature wearing my face. And then I couldn't control it. My hand, acting of its own accord, began to shake. The bell started to ring, not the faint jingle from before, but a frantic, deafening clang that echoed through the house, through my very skull. It was a sound of pure despair. The creature's elongated jaw dropped open in a silent, ecstatic laugh. The lights in the room didn't just flicker, they exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging us into absolute darkness. The only thing I could see was the faint, rusty outline of the bell, ringing faster and faster. The cold intensified, a biting, soul-deep chill that felt like it was freezing me from the inside out. I tried to scream, to fight, but my voice was stolen, trapped in my throat. The darkness swirled around me, thick and suffocating like black smoke, and I felt myself being pulled apart and woven back together into something new, something terrible. My last coherent thought was of the red coat, the feeling, of course, stained fabric wrapping around me. The ringing of the bell was the only sound in the universe, a funeral dirge for the man I used to be. The next morning, Christmas Day, the sun rose on a quiet, snow-covered street. In my house, everything looked almost normal, save for a shattered fireplace and a fine layer of soot on every surface. 2 children, bundled in their winter coats, stopped outside, their eyes wide. They could hear it, a faint, lonely jingle coming from inside. They looked up at the windows and saw a tall, shadowy figure in a tattered red coat moving slowly through the halls. The figure paused, looking out at the new day, and if you were close enough, if you listened with all your might, you might have heard a faint, muffled scream. A scream that sounded a lot like mine, trapped forever within the folds of that cursed coat. So, who will hear the bells next Christmas? And what happens when they answer? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you hear a jingle in the dead of winter, don't pick it up. Thanks for watching.